me at Cello, Cello. You had me at Cello. You had me at Cello. Oh, you had me at Cello.
All right. Hello, everybody. It's 5 o'clock on a Friday again, and you know what that means. Time for Cello Chat. Have as a guest today Angie Schmidt, and this is going to be fun. How are you today, Angie?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Terrific, terrific. So, like you mentioned when we just got started, or before we got started, we've known each other for a while, but I don't know your story. I know you started out as an Ohioan, but then grew up in Wisconsin. But what is all the rest of your story, and how did you get started in music and on the cello in particular and all that?
I actually was just interviewed by an 8th grade student of mine that asked, why did you end up a music teacher? And I just thought, how could I not? My parents are both professional musicians, and my sister was already playing horn starting in about 5th grade, and she's 3 years older. So I grew up in a family that they were talking about music history and listening to some Shostakovich and lots of classical band repertoire. So I'm well-rounded that way, but I'm also very much a music person. There was no way I wasn't going to be a musician. So I started in orchestra in 4th grade, wasn't sure if I wanted to do violin or cello, and my sister said she would rather hear a dying cow than a dying cat. So I started cello. Little did I know that I would have to carry it 8 blocks to and from my middle school, but I'm glad it's worth carrying around. Absolutely great instrument. And I thought I didn't want to get bored, so I started percussion in 5th grade. That was partly from my dad needing a percussionist in the summer after 4th grade, and he kind of looped me into playing bass drum in a summer camp. And I thought, well, I can do this. Didn't want to get bored again, so I had some piano lessons in 7th grade, a little bit on and off, but not like 4 years straight, even maybe 2 years, and then I took a year off. I didn't have a lot of private lessons on cello before high school. I think maybe 2 years total. I was kind of trying to figure out what I wanted. I knew I wanted to do music. I knew I wanted to do instrumental music, and I just didn't know where my primary focus was going to be. So I played a little bit of bass in band. My band director knew I was a cellist. He said, well, you can learn bass, because he needed a jazz band bass player the next year. So I got put in a room with a book and a cassette tape and a bass and kind of learned that way. And then my freshman year, second semester, I ended up in jazz band with a senior who said, don't put your thumb there. Nobody does it that way. Here's how you play bass. So I stayed in orchestra band all the way through high school, and then kind of figured out, I think at the end of freshman year, that I wanted to stick with cello as the primary instrument. It was David Becker conducting the WSMA Honors Orchestra, the Saint-Saëns organ concerto, that I was just, this is it, this is me. And the chair audition was fun. I didn't know tenor clef, had no idea that it existed. I knew about treble clef and bass clef from piano, and they had us sight read some tenor clef, and I just went, okay, I've heard that you go one string higher than written. So when it got to the tenor clef, it started out bass clef, got to the tenor clef. I just kind of kept on going and sort of pretended I knew what I was doing, and I played the right rhythm and some of the right notes. And the cello coach said, that was pretty gutsy. And I said, thank you. So I got third chair, which was pretty cool. And then that fall, the Honors Orchestra does a summer camp, and then they come back. A lot of people watching this might know this. The Wisconsin has a special program where you come back in the fall and play at Teachers Convention. So all those people you met in the summer, you can come back to. So I came back and said, hey, everybody, and noticed the first chair player was gone, and we're kind of waiting for her, and she never showed up. So I don't know if she was sick or what. And what I learned was that the third chair person gets to play first chair then, and the second chair cellist was not real happy. But so I moved up, and luckily I looked at the solos in the summer. We were playing Der Rosenkavalier by Strauss. And so luckily I looked at it a little bit and was able to figure things out. But I'd say Honors Orchestra was a real strong pull for me, since I didn't have a lot of private lessons, and there were only a few cellists in the orchestra where I went to high school. So went to UW-Milwaukee for music education. And at the time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to do performance or not. And my dad gave me some good advice. He said, no one can keep you from performing. You don't need a degree to perform. They can keep you from teaching, though. So if you want to teach, get a degree. So that's what I did at UWM. I really learned a lot from Wolfgang Laufer, was the cello professor at the time. Very honest with me that I was behind technically. And I said, yeah, I know. I knew that. So I was also kind of already well-rounded, though, from having been in band and having a percussion background. I could sight read and I could count those rhythms, maybe better than your average string player. I might not have had that great of a tone yet, but I was coming along. So I practiced a lot in college, and I had people knocking on the practice room door, you're an ed major. Why are you practicing so much? And I thought, I know. That's a horrible question, right? Like, once again, no one's going to keep me from performing. I ended up in a string quartet, I think maybe sophomore year. And that was great because our viola player and violinist, Mary Pat Subjack, many of you may know, she was like our Haydn. She was very well organized, got people together. So I would basically show up, play, and she would take a little bit more money because she was dealing with like the mother of the bride, and she was our manager also. And that was fine. I just loved showing up and playing. I got to play with Jerry Logney, who's played violin since he was 3. He's perfect pitch. So I learned right away, I tune to you, I will adjust. And it was great to play with that string quartet. That was really a learning experience, just as much in college as my lessons, I think, and the orchestra. And then I graduated, got my job in Lake Mills 26 years ago. So I've been teaching orchestra beginners all the way through 12th grade for 26 years. After 2 years, I wanted to go on to master's degree right away. I had all kinds of plans. And they told me, we want you to have a couple years teaching experience first. So I did that. And that actually probably helped me afford the tuition to go to college again. So went to UW-Madison for string pedagogy. And this was kind of unique too. It was the only place in the state where I could kind of design my own degree. So I wanted to get better on violin, viola, and bass, because I felt like if I'm teaching these instruments, I want to be not just like right ahead of the kids. I want to be really quite accomplished. So I worked a lot on violin, viola, cello, bass, and conducting, which was another thing that I wanted to get really solid on. So that was great. Going to UWM and UW-Madison, I had a lot of variety in my background, and can compare the two schools. They're both great, and they were both very different experiences. So if anyone wants to ask me questions about that, I'd be happy to. Let's see. Anything else in my biography, or did you want to jump in?
Well, let's use that as a springboard into some more specifics. I suppose the first thing is I'd love to ask about how, I mean, you've made the point a couple times already, nobody's going to stop you from performing. And you and I know that, and it's kind of funny. I think some young people still need to hear that several times.
Yeah.
Now, so by day, you have baton in hand and are conducting orchestras, leading orchestras, and then presumably on evenings or weekends, or I'm not sure entirely when, you play electric cello in a band called Far Corner.
Yes, I do.
Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, and 20 years ago, it's been a while now that band started. It started, I think, when I brought a Rickenbacker amp home from Lake Mills High School, and I plugged it in. I think my parents had bought me a pickup that you can put on an acoustic, a Fishman little, not very professional level, but still something you can plug in. And I plugged it in, and we hit the distortion, and we went, ooh. And my husband is a composer, drum set player, keyboard player, and he had already been thinking about progressive rock where that meets classical music, and there's a lot of places where they meet. So we worked with Craig Wachner, who was getting a degree in music, I believe performance, from UW-Madison at the time. And we already had some Milwaukee connections. So we were looking around for a bass player and looking around, and we heard about William Kopecky from the Kopecky Brothers, Racine area. He's played with a ton of different players, lots of rock people, progressive rock people, and not someone who does much reading music. So we asked him, who do you know that plays bass? And he said, well, actually, I would like to try it myself. And we thought, wow, because he's a great player. A lot of fretless playing. He also plays sitar, which is very interesting. It lends itself to the scales that his band uses. So we started rehearsing in Lake Mills at first, and then we were rehearsing at our house once we got a basement that's a little more soundproof. And we cranked out 3 CDs over many, many years. I think our biggest job was probably being invited to play at Prague Day Festival down in North Carolina, outdoor festival. And that was a fascinating trip, but really fun to do and interesting to play with people with different backgrounds. So my husband has a doctorate in musical composition. And Craig has a degree in percussion. And then Bill has this amazing ability, but completely plays by ear. So in rehearsal, we'd be going through, I'd be reading, and Bill would have learned it all up here. And let's start at B. And he'd go, hold on. And he would be going through the piece in his head. His ear is that good. And we play complex stuff that's got time changes, and a lot of people say it's kind of where Stravinsky if Stravinsky was writing rock and roll, where that would meet.
I like it.
And so I learned the hard way. First time in a recording studio, I did a horrible job. In my opinion, I was just completely out of my element. I was very nervous and didn't know what to do because I'm used to performing for an audience. And now there's just these people in a sound booth and there's no feedback. And I hadn't listened enough to the recordings by ear the way our bass player did. So I could read, but really internalizing it, I learned from playing with this group that matters a lot. I had never improvised. Never, ever. And we use an octatonic scale, which is alternating whole steps and half steps, which is kind of tonal sounding, going into theory a little bit here. But to learn how to improvise with people who could really improvise was really a struggle for me. But once again, it was like getting another degree in college or taking a great course somewhere, and something I never would have learned on my own. And that really influenced my teaching. So now I improvise with my students all the time. They think I'm good at it, but I'm skating by really. And the first thing we start with the younger students is just playing to a drone and figuring out what rhythms and pitches, what mood do you want to bring? And I can do that in a circle with students who've played for a year or two, or students who've played for 10 years. And as people get older, they get a little bit more set in their ways. And it's a little more like, well, I don't know what notes to play. And I tell them there are no wrong notes, but if you feel like you're on a wrong note, just slide out of it. And you're probably really close to the perfect note in there somewhere. So, yeah.
I like it.
So we've played some shows. We played at Milwaukee School of Engineering, and that's been archived, which was really fun to play live there because with headphones on and your own little sound panel, I want more bass, I could physically turn it down or turn it up. They've got a great radio station there. So that was fun. Dan and I, since we both still live in here, our bass player moved to France a while ago, so it's a little harder to play with him. We've done things calling ourselves the outing duo, and we've played some far corner tunes kind of stripped down to just cello and piano. So that's more recently what I've been doing is actually playing with the Kettle Moraine Symphony. So that's the opposite end of. And one quick story with that, when one is playing in a rock band and you're working on being an exciting performer and whatever, I've figured out how to moving the bow around is very exciting to watch. But I also got in the habit of stomping my foot on rests, which was really fun. And then I got to my first classical rehearsal again, where I was sitting playing, some sort of Tchaikovsky or Beethoven, and my foot went down and I went, oh yeah, I'm doing classical. I can't do that right now. So I just learned to wiggle my toe inside my foot. And I try to not be too flamboyant when I'm playing, but as I've gotten to be older, it's actually good to move while you're playing. It'll keep you a little healthier, I've learned. So.
That's very funny. I love that. So for improvising in octatonic scales, do you find yourself practicing diminished seventh chords quite a bit to warm up for that, or?
Kind of. Sometimes I've just played. We have some free music of us. It's just free to download on our website. And some of it is us jamming with that scale. And as far as preparing for it, it's written down. C D sharp or E flat. Oh, I figured out that G and F sharp work really well together. And I figured out like where the harmonics are on my cello that fit in that scale. And frankly, like I said, I was kind of trying to get by at the time. So I'd pick something simple and do like a tremolo harmonic or tremolo gliss and things that cello can do that our keyboard, drum set, and electric bass wouldn't be doing. But as I got more familiar with that scale, that might be a scale I know better than a lot of other scales.
Yeah.
It's kind of one scale.
Practice does that. Yeah.
I know one scale.
Now, are you one of these people who is super picky about the sound that you get with the electric cello? You know how there are some people, like the drummers, who own 100 different cymbals for the perfect timbre for the situation?
That's a really good question. I tend to be the person that shows up in the studio and I'll play, and then someone else can do the mixing and mastering.
Okay.
In performance, I learned the hard way, playing a fretless instrument. If you can't hear, you're in trouble. So now I've learned to say, no, I can't hear myself. Nope, I still can't hear myself. So yeah, I learned the hard way with sound checks to tell the sound person that I'm the guitar of the ensemble, because they don't know what to do with drum set, bass, keyboard. Oh, we got this. And they're like, what do we do with the cello? And I'd have to say, I'm the guitar. And I have a distortion pedal. And then that kind of made sense when they'd hear us warming up. But as far as the tone of the instrument goes, that's a good question. I've done some recording for Far Corner on the acoustic also. And it's really picky, but I have a fairly decent Yamaha electric. The shifting up to fourth position is tiniest bit different than the acoustic instrument, just a little easier to get up there, which means I realized that I would sometimes be sharp up there. And that was tough. So the intonation was more of a challenge for me. Maybe I should have been thinking about tone, but I have this nice sound number 7 on I have a guitar pedal set that I really enjoy, kind of the more ethereal sounds. So that it maybe doesn't sound always like a cello. A lot of times it sounds like a guitar, but that's just our music is, when it goes to like the heavy rock end of it, it'll sound like a distorted guitar. So I have to
admit, I listened to several of the tracks from Endangered, and there were times that I was really wondering, and like that's gotta be Angie's electric cello, but it took some imagination to picture how you were getting that sound. That's neat.
That's kind of, I think of my specialty as finding the ugliest and wildest and strangest sounds I can on the cello. Experimental, yeah, I'm all about the 1960s experimental stuff, I guess.
Nice. Now, so the next question, what do your students think about this? You know, do you on a regular basis kind of show them what else is, what other things are possible with strings, or are they aware enough and they're always coming to you with, hey, how did you do this, and how can I do this on the instrument?
That's a really good question. A couple times our group performed actually for our students, once in Lake Mills and once in Milwaukee for a trip that we were playing for other high school music students. And I wonder, I don't even know if my 5th and 6th graders know what our music sounds like. I've told them I play electric cello in a band. And this is the time of year after concerts that I bring it over for some show and tell, and I let them do the pedal changes so they can see what those are.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was surprised a couple times. I asked a few years ago, I know it was before COVID, and a couple of my students were really familiar with Far Corner, and then some of them had no idea. Like maybe I mentioned it and played a little bit when they were coming into class. And so I'd say it's probably a mixed bag right now.
Interesting. All right. And so at Lake Mills, you have a standard string orchestra, you have a pops orchestra, you have a chamber, or probably more than one chamber group.
Actually, no. The
all right.
orchestra. So our school is smaller. We're the Capital Conference. So if you know, like a town like Watertown size, we're much smaller than that. So Most towns our size don't have an orchestra in the public school. It's just something that happens with larger schools. So we do have an orchestra, and it's pretty large for the size district we have. It's grown. We do have the pop strings. This was one of your questions, by the way. Enthusiasm and motivation. I try to encourage healthy competition. So in the fall, we do chair auditions, and the top 12 kids make it into the pop strings group. Is usually how I've done it in the past. And it's gone really well. I allow them to do chair challenges after each concert. So if someone is super motivated and they want to do better and they've been practicing, they tend to make it in by senior year, not always. But we perform weddings out in the community, and they usually perform at least one piece on the concert. And that tends to be a little bit more of a rock or pop song, but not always. It kind of depends. This last concert we did sort of a jazz tune, able to plug in the cello into that same Rickenbacker amp. It's still working. And I've got for the district a couple electric violins and an electric bass. I was able to get grant money, which was wonderful. Apply for grants, those of you out there. It takes time, but it's worth it. Definitely.
Nice. All right. So what, I mean, to a certain extent, I imagine that not only having the opportunity for an orchestra, that if I practice harder, I can get into that orchestra. But what are some of your other just go-tos? What's in your bag of tricks for when you think this is a student that with the right encouragement could find the habit and the love for practicing more often, more diligently?
I think my high schoolers, since I teach 5th through 12th grade, my high schoolers, they know me by, there's maybe a couple that move in that they learn pretty soon what they need to do for me or how they can get along. For my middle schoolers, I think is a little bit more where the struggle is with our schedule. It's harder to take like a band, orchestra, and choir. And since the size school we have, it's really unique that they're able to do more than one music class. So to try to encourage them to stay in, I've actually grabbed my high school pop strings players and I said, hey, what are you doing third block? That first skinny, that's when I have 6th graders. Can you come and do a side-by-side rehearsal? And it's a pain to schedule it. It's so worth doing, though, to see like the kid that's kind of behavior-wise needs a lot of structure, and all of a sudden there's a senior next to him playing bass very calmly, and they really will take it from an older student. And when I had a much smaller program, I thought, well, what do I do to build up this program? And I offered mentor lessons to students in the summer. So if I have a student that's already played for a year, they can take lessons in the summer, like with a senior or someone who's graduated. It's great for the high schoolers. They'll get maybe volunteer hours or a recommendation letter from me, and they're showing much better than I can sometimes. The communication between someone that's just maybe 3 years apart really makes a difference. And I saw that really do good things for the program at the middle school, then started to grow also. So that was one thing that I think helped with retention, and it definitely helped with motivation. If you want to talk about motivating high schoolers to practice, sometime, or college even, sometimes it's just finding what you love to play. And I have to admit, I'm probably much less disciplined than you are as far as practicing scales and etudes. A lot of times if I feel like I don't have the time, I look in the piece for, can I make an etude out of this section? How can I torture myself with this? I'll play every note doubled. I'll play it half tempo. I'll play it backwards. And I learned that shifting backwards really helps a lot. That'd be one thing. Trying to be creative with practice. Instead of doing like a practice log, when did you practice? No, it's more, what did you practice? So I'll write on my students' music what the problems are, what the measures are, and they know in the next lesson we are starting at that measure, and we're going to see if it got better, and if not, we'll spend 3 minutes on it. And hey, 3 minutes really helped that one measure. Another tactic might be listening, and with the way YouTube has grown, it's real easy now to find tutorials on whatever you could possibly want. And I've tried to get my students to play by ear, find something that they want to play. Our choir director just started a Trium music honor society in our high school. I think maybe 3 years ago, she started it up, and the kids are playing at a venue downtown on like a Thursday night, and they get to pick what they're going to play. And sometimes that really motivates them also.
Yeah.
So, and the other thing is trying to encourage the multi-ensemble participation. I think, once again, that makes kids and people really well-rounded. So we do have a full orchestra that we throw together at least once a year. And sometimes I'll grab our band director shares rehearsal time with me really well. So I might say, hey, you've got 11 percussionists, so we'll do saber dance for string orchestra and 7 percussionists, and they'll come on over and rehearsal and do that. So yeah, wide variety of repertoire, making it fun, hopefully.
Yeah. Excellent. Outstanding. Now, okay, I want to ask, because I got to hear your orchestra, one of your orchestras play, what was it, just a couple of months ago? Mm-hmm. And I consider myself very lucky that I get to hear a lot of the orchestras from the region. And it's interesting to me, certain times things will just really stand out. And I'd have to say your groups are consistently have a much more solid rhythm in general.
Thank you.
And so is there something proactive that you do from the podium that prioritizes rhythm?
I think part of that, I share out of, I think it's 38 or 40 students in orchestra right now. 8 of them are also in band, and they share rehearsal time. So they're with me for 42 minutes. They go to the band director for 42 minutes. So those kids are killer sight readers. They can sight read. It's amazing. And in return, we have to work with those students on tone, vibrato, shifting, intonation. Sometimes there's always a hole, right? Yeah. We try to not have holes, but everybody has them. And that might be something that we spend time on in lessons then, because I know they're learning to read music fairly well. I think my background as a percussionist and being in band all the way through, I realized there were general holes in our whatever we call it, our method books, or whatever orchestra teachers usually use. I've used Essential Elements with Suzuki method book that I went in finale and arranged the violin book so it matched viola, cello, bass, because those pieces are great. They're great for teaching that intonation and staccato technique or whatever it is. So combining that, I think, has helped a lot. And I approach it that way. I'll give my students rhythm assignments that are in the back of the Essential Elements band book, but weren't in the back of the Essential Elements orchestra book. And I said, why is this? So I just took them, copied them, and give those assignments to my students. So I think I've emphasized rhythm, and maybe it's paid off. You're telling me. That's good. It's good to hear.
Yeah. Oh, it's so nice going into any performance situation, feeling like your rhythmic chops are reliable. You know what I mean? So even if a student feels like they're freaking out under the adrenaline or something, your rhythmic sense can carry you through to it's just, whereas without, if that's a shaky house of cards, good luck.
Nothing else is going to survive, right?
Oh, yeah. So that makes a good segue to ask you about your books, sure. The 101 Tips, and it exists both for cello and for violin. Yeah.
Yes. And I lucked out. Hal Leonard employs my husband. So this wasn't a book I wrote and then submitted for publication. The 101 Tips was already in existence. And they kind of came and asked me, and I said, sure, I could do this. This was my kind of writing. So it's short chapters, 101 chapters. And I really like some of the ways I approached this. They sort of let me do what I wanted to do. So it would be great for someone who maybe was in band through high school and wants to start cello after. It's kind of for adults, is what I'm saying. It can be used with students, but I think it could also be for more advanced players, especially if someone has never performed any kind of alternative strings before and they're wondering how do I do that? How do I start with improvisation? What is my role in a rock band if I'm playing cello or violin in a rock band? One of my favorite chapters is on what do you bring to a gig? because there's always something that people forget, and that I've just made that list over the years of what do I need to bring to if I'm going to play a wedding, what do I need to bring? Well, if it's an outdoor wedding, that list has 10 more items, and there's a lot in here. So yeah, that's available through Hal Leonard as a digital, or they sell. And I was kind of excited; it still has the old CD in it. So for those of you who don't have the dependable internet, right?
Right, nice. Well, now, Angie, do you also compose and arrange?
A little bit. My husband, Dan Maskey, has written for tons of different, since college, and band and different level orchestra, vocal even too. And then, of course, the music for it's kind of described as chamber rock is the Far Corner group. Any ideas I've gotten, he's always told me, yeah, write that down or record yourself on your phone, whatever you can do. So I think at the end of Endangered, one of the pieces, that's our second CD that came out many years ago. We each in the band were allowed to kind of write our own part, which was kind of fun. So I grabbed the bamboo flute. My mom's a professional flute player. Sure, I can do this. And just played some things and wrote some things down, and then realized that, hey, I've got some holes here, and my husband helped fill in some of those holes. I've written a few pieces for orchestra. I did for a composition class for college. And then I got some ideas that are still kind of brewing for maybe a piece for my middle school students about a playground, and it has different sounds from the playground and like different games that the kids would play. But that might be a cool summer project.
That's very cool. Well, then, okay, speaking of summer projects, what performances do you have coming up, or projects or other irons in the fire?
Let's see. I'm playing a wedding this summer with a student of mine, which is kind of fun. One of my favorite things to do. Yeah, it's a recent graduate from the high school where I taught. I actually taught her little brother viola. She's getting married in August, and the concertmaster of my orchestra is going to play with me. So I always like that when my students end up kind of being someone that I can play a gig with. And that's happened several times, which is sort of fun. That's my next kind of plan coming up. I recently got into the Kettle Moraine Symphony, and that was, if you have time for a quick story.
Yeah, do.
This was the COVID, used to wearing a mask all the time, used to not seeing anybody kind of situation. I hadn't played in front of anybody in a long time. And with Far Corner, I'm in a group, or with my orchestra, I'm on stage. I have really no fear of speaking in public at all. But I hadn't done an audition in over 10 years. And it occurred to me while I was playing, sweat's going down my back. I'm like, I don't feel so good today. I have to do this audition. I have to. And it was just like for a sub cello. It wasn't even like a real, anyway. So I'm playing along and feeling horrible, and feeling horrible about my playing. And the director, real great guy, Dr. Hinson, sort of asked me to do some things musically with the excerpt. I'm like, oh, I can do that. Yep. And so I felt better after that, and got home and just like, that was an awful waste of my time. And I ended up getting hired for a couple concerts, and then kind of in rehearsal, they figured out, oh, I know how to play cello. And I ended up getting offered, the contracts for all the concerts. And then I realized, oh, I'm kind of in the group now. So anybody out there who always do an audition, even if you think it's going to be horrible or you don't know how it's going to work out. Just that experience is a really good experience. And I told my high schoolers that story, like, hey, I was like almost shaking. It was awful, but I'm so glad I did it because it worked out. And I hadn't played in an orchestra playing at that level, and they play some contemporary music. It's good variety. So I'm really glad I did that, even though at the time it was should I keep? No, just do it.
Excellent. And let's see, out of your hobbies, you do husky rescue?
Yeah, I've over the years, there's a calendar way back there. It's them really muddy, but there it is. Over the years, we've rescued 4 different Siberian Huskies. They happen to be gorgeous. They are rescue though. So, and every day they need a walk. That's a dog that has to get a walk every day. And it's in this, summer, yes, but in the winter, they keep me from hibernating, which is great. Gotten more into reading lately. I've been reading the Shostakovich and the Leningrad, his 7th symphony. Boy, that's an interesting story. It's really interesting. The siege of Leningrad and how he's writing a symphony while there's bombs going off in his city, and That was an interesting one. I heard about that book actually from our honors orchestra cello players. A whole bunch of kids in the orchestra. This was also during COVID. Were sharing like, hey, let's start a book club, because they just started talking over Zoom about what are your favorite books for musicians. So that one actually came from one of those cello students. I have to thank them still, and because it's a really good book about Shostakovich, one of my favorite composers. So.
Nice. All right. Well, best of luck, and
Thank you.
I know you like the outdoors as so many of us do, and it can be such not only inspiring for music in general, but also just like what you say with the Huskies keeping you from hibernating. It's such a relief up here in the frigid north. So may you have a wonderful summer, and thanks for sharing the stories and advice and inspiration. There's a lot to think about.
Good to hear. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me.
Entirely my pleasure. Yeah, it really has been. And everybody watching, happy practicing all week. We'll see you this time next Friday. Take care.